Late February 2026 brought a sudden eruption of kinetic warfare to the Middle East. Over 13 escalating days, Operation Epic Fury pulled the region into direct military conflict. In immediate retaliation, Iran sealed off the Strait of Hormuz, cutting off access to the world's most critical maritime shipping choke point. This chart tracks Brent crude oil prices during the conflict. You can see the price holding steady around $80 until the blockade shattered market expectations, sending the cost of a barrel vertically past the $100 threshold. At that price level, the threat of a cascading economic crisis becomes very real. A sustained blockade pointed straight toward 1970s-style global inflation, driving up the costs of transportation, straining global manufacturing lines, and inflating basic agricultural fertilizers. Financial centers and governments around the world immediately began bracing for a worst-case scenario, a systemic failure of global supply chains. Then, the strikes abruptly stopped. After nearly 2 straight weeks of intensive military action, the United States suspended its bombing campaign. Military advisors had warned the administration about rapidly dwindling air defense munitions. At the same time, back-channel negotiations opened with Oman to find a diplomatic off-ramp. Financial markets reacted to the ceasefire with instant euphoric relief. Traders treated the pause as a definitive end to the crisis. Brent crude immediately tumbled by up to 9%, settling back into a much more comfortable $80 range. But the numbers on the trading floor didn't match the situation on the water. The markets had priced in a piece that didn't physically exist. This stacked chart breaks down how the price of a barrel of oil is actually calculated during a crisis. The bottom layer represents the base cost of physical scarcity, while the top layer represents the fear-driven geopolitical risk premium. When the U.S. paused its bombing campaign, that top layer of fear evaporated. Speculative capital quickly exited the futures market as traders decided the absolute worst-case scenario of a massive regional war was off the table. Yet the base scarcity layer didn't move an inch. The sharp drop in price occurred without a single new drop of physical oil returning to the global market. The stock market rally was driven entirely by psychological relief, completely divorced from the physical reality in the Persian Gulf. Out on the water, the blockade held firm. Under new leadership, Iranian authorities maintained they were still in absolute control of the Strait of Hormuz. Revolutionary Guard naval units actively enforced the closure, firing warning shots and turning back commercial vessels attempting to use designated shipping lanes. Without guaranteed safe passage, major maritime insurers halted their coverage. Even with the bombing paused, commercial transit through the region remained structurally impossible. If global natural gas and millions of barrels of oil are trapped in the Gulf, why haven't we seen rolling blackouts or empty gas stations? Data from the European Central Bank points to massive hidden buffers built up before the war. Entering 2026, the oil market had a supply surplus of about 2.5 million barrels a day, backed by unusually high strategic reserves. Those reserves were stretched further by a prolonged slump in Asian petrochemical consumption and lower demand for jet fuel. But those buffers have strict limits. European natural gas storage sits at just 54% capacity, lagging far behind the volume needed for winter heating. Every day the strait remains closed, the global economy burns a little deeper through those finite safety nets. The artificial drop in oil prices provided a brief macroeconomic reprieve. It prompted a decline in government bond yields and temporarily eased pressure on core inflation metrics. This gave central banks, including the Federal Reserve, the political and economic breathing room to leave interest rates unchanged, rather than forcing an emergency hike. This market relief ignores the fact that the physical blockade remains intact. The ceasefire represents a brief pause in the center of a much larger storm. The 2026 conflict exposed a lethal flaw in how the world sources its power. The entire global economy relies heavily on the uninterrupted flow of resources through a single, highly vulnerable maritime choke point. The just-in-time global energy architecture was built for efficiency, not resilience. When one critical node fails, the system lacks the redundancy to absorb the shock. To mitigate these choke point risks, governments are now actively moving away from globalized efficiency and accelerating investments into domestic, localized power generation. The financial markets may have priced in a ceasefire, But until the physical bottleneck of Hormuz is actually broken and shipping resumes, global energy security hangs by a thread.